get into that. But, there's a couple things I'm curious about. I'd love to pick your brain on. And the first one is, when we talk about small businesses and the fact that they fail at such a high rate, I'm sure there's thousands of reasons why they fail. But do you have an inkling on what one of those major reasons might be?
There's a book. I love to read books.
Yeah.
There's a book that is probably one of the largest selling business books out there today. Good to Create. You probably heard.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Very prolific guy, smart guy. And there's some very important concepts in that book. And anybody who is getting into business, I would encourage them to get that book, buy the hard copy, read it, marinate in it, make notes, study it, decide those concepts. One of those concepts that's in that book is he talks about the hedgehog versus the fox. And the hedgehog puts his head down and focuses on something that he needs to do. And the fox, he runs all around. I think one of the biggest problems or things that hold entrepreneurs back in their businesses is their foxes. And it's understandable because when you start a business, you would like to focus on one thing, but hey, you got to pay the bills.
That's right.
You pay the employees, you got to pay the bills. So we need to run around and find business so that we can be sustainable. Unfortunately, it's like the opposite of what allows you to be sustainable over time, because eventually you just wear out. You can't find enough of these little pieces of business.
Right.
Just focusing on one thing. So I think that would be the one thing that if an entrepreneur could think about, would be to focus on one thing that's at the root of the strategy of their business and get really good at that.
Love that answer, and love the example of the hedgehog and the fox. Speaking of animals, just to have a little fun here, if you could talk to an animal, any animal, which one do you think would have the most interesting conversation?
Wow, that's at least you didn't ask me if I was a tree. What kind of a tree would I choose? This is a different take on that question, right?
That's right.
Animal, probably a hawk.
A hawk. Why?
Well, because they're flying over, looking at everything.
That's a great answer.
They have a perspective, a view of the world that most people would never have.
That's right. We'll jump back into business. Strategic thinking is your business. Tell me why you decided to start this and what your why is, basically.
Well, I had an investment banking business many years ago, and I was doing very well, making good money. But, and this goes back to Jim Cowsey, and he's got the Venn diagram, what you're passionate about, what you can be good at or best in the world at, and then understand the economics. And, I just wasn't passionate about it. And I was talking to one of my clients, and every time we went in to help them with their finances to kind of redo their balance sheet, they had kind of gotten off track. They'd lost their way. And he gave me this book. He says, here, you could help us with the strategy that Laura is helping us with the investment banking work. Here's this book that I just got called Strategic Thinking. Why don't you read this book and to help us with that? And I read that book, and it made strategy so simple. And I met the author, and he persuaded me to join his firm, and I just fell in love with doing strategy.
Yeah.
But the reason you say the why is because people jump to do the plan, and they don't do the thinking up front. And that's I think that's a lot of the problems companies have out there. They jump into the plan, but they don't do the thinking up front. We get people to think differently about their business than they ever thought about it before. And we can truly get them to change the game and tilt the playing field to their advantage. I know that sounds like a 25-cent marketing word, but we do get them to change the game and tilt the playing field to their advantage. And we get 10x results all the time.
Tell me more about businesses that jump into the plan. Does this go back to that fox idea?
Thinking is hard.
Of course.
People don't want it, and they don't have a process to think. So they just get into a room and they start talking about all these things, but there's no framework to have a really structured conversation about how to think about their business. So they just jump in, and usually what happens is they look at history, say, let's get the budget out. Let's look at last year's budget. Oh, let's see, we did X. Well, why don't we do X plus 10% this year or 3% or whatever? And they say, well, let's just kind of move the chess pieces around so that we can do a little bit more next year. But they don't really think about the business, and that is something that I think holds a lot of companies back.
Yeah, I would bet you're right. Because they're too busy jumping into the plan and not really seeing What's the old
plan, do the
yeah?
budget.
What's the old saying? The forest through the
They can't. That is, that's a great metaphor to think about. They don't see the forest for the trees because they're so busy getting the plan done so they can put it in the book.
right, because they're supposed to put it in the book. They believe. You gotta gotta have the book. So all right, so I did see that when you're working with, I did see that you work with Fortune 1000 companies. We've talked about that a little bit. Is the strategy when you work with a company that's a Fortune 1000? Is the strategy for working with them different than if you were to work with, a company that's got 100 employees, or is it the exact same framework that you're following?
Actually, it's the same.
Okay.
It's the same questions. The decimal point's just in a different place. And
Okay.
most of my company clients are large clients, but I've had some situations recently. In fact, some companies here in Florida that are startup companies. And one gentleman hired me to work with him. He was actually on the board of another company that I was working with, and we were at dinner one night. And he said, I got this startup company I'm working with. You could come and help us. I said, okay. So I went and I helped him, and he grew the business, made a fortune, sold the company, made a couple of $100 million, and he had a non-compete. And so for a year, the year went by, and then he's going to start another company. And he said, we did so well in the first one. Can you come and help me do this one?
Step back.
And we've helped him start that company, and he's doing very, very well. So it's the same thinking. It's just on a different scale.
Interesting. All right. With that in mind, individuals that are running for any business, really, but especially individuals that are running Fortune 1000 companies have gotten there by doing things a certain way, and it's worked out well for them. And in my experience, the larger the company and the leaders of that company, what's the word? The more stubborn they could be. Hey, I've been doing it this way. It's working. I've been doing it this way for so long. So how do you come in and convince them that this is a better way of doing things?
Well, to one point, to answer your question is, I guess I don't, because our process is a cross-functional collaborative process where the CEO wants to involve the management team to help think through and formulate the strategy. But there are many CEOs who are very autocratic, and it's my way or the highway. And that particular individual doesn't hire.
Oh, I see.
They don't want me to come in there and involve the whole management team and do a cross-collaborative view. They have their view of the world, and that's the way that it's going to be. And they don't want to cause any disruption. They just want everyone to do their thing. Right. So I don't know that person because I never.
Yeah, never worked with them. And then conversely, or related, I guess. But do you sit down with folks and decide, you know what, this isn't a good fit? Like, do you ever run into that as well?
Well, several years ago, the answer to that question would probably be no. I would literally work with anybody. But I've gotten to a point in my career now in consulting where if I can't see that there's a fit with a company that wants to achieve a 10x level of return or growth in their business, I would and I have actually in the last couple of years, I've walked away from a couple of opportunities because I just did not get a sense that the CEO or the management team really wanted that level.
Yeah. What do you think are some ways that, a small business owner that's a fox, can become a hedgehog?
Mindset.
Okay.
Determining what his or her, what their real differentiator is that they can be the best at. I read this quote the other day. This is not my quote. I read this quote the other day. And the quote was, small hinges move big doors.
Small hinges move big doors. Okay.
What they're saying is if you've got a great big door and you're trying to push it, right? And you can't because it's so heavy. But if you put a little hinge on it,
the
door swings open.
That's right.
So when you think about what your differentiator is for your company that makes you different different, not necessarily better, but different than anybody else, the metaphorical question would be to ask, what's your hinge? What's the hinge that are going to cause my customers to want me more than anybody else? There's a fellow that I worked with, have worked with for decades. He just retired. as kind of a sales coach trainer. And he was telling the story because he taught me all this. And he's telling me the story about this woman who came into his sales training program. And she was a veterinarian and she had a vet clinic and they weren't getting enough business. She was wanting to get some more business. And they went through this whole process of figuring it out. And she decided that one of her skill sets that she truly had as a veterinarian is that she knew how to work with big dogs.
Okay.
So you said you're a dog?
I am, yeah.
So do you have a big dog?
We got one that's, she's about 70 pounds.
Okay.
So not huge.
But even bigger than like a German Shepherd. I mean, even
yeah, big dog.
So people who have big dogs know that it's a different story working with a big dog than a Schnauzer.
For sure.
Different lifestyle.
Right.
Diet, health, everything, right? So she goes to this networking. And, you've maybe been to some of these networking events where you go there as a guest, and then whoever brought you, you get to stand up and give a 90 seconds.
Yeah.
Hey, here's my...
I'm Chris. Yeah, for sure.
And so she was at this networking event, and she stood up. It was her turn. And she stood up to say what she said. And she's just, I'm a veterinarian, and I work with people who have big dogs. And there was another guy on the other side of the room, and he stood up. He says, I want your card.
Yeah.
That is a little hinge.
Yeah.
That's the kind of differentiator. See, saying that you do something that's different is only part of it. The other part is to do something different that your customer or your prospect values.
Absolutely.
You can't just be different. You got to be different in a way that they
Yeah, you got to be able to bring value and show that. And the way that she did that in that example, that 5 seconds.
She had what? 5 words?
Right.
7 words?
Her small hinge.
If it's a small hinge.
Yeah.
If it's a small hinge, it's
Can move a big door. For sure.
That it's just a metaphor. But I think it's a good metaphor.
I love it. I've never heard it.
So you go back to people who might listen to this podcast, you could go back to your company and you could say, hey, what's our hinge?
That's right. Yeah.
Do we have it? By the way,
Well, they have to have a hinge if they're in business. Tell me.
People who try to figure that out, it's very hard. It is very hard. And some people can't figure it out because they don't have it.
Interesting.
Because they're a fox.
Because they're a fox.
He's a fox. He's not a hedgehog, so he doesn't have that, or she doesn't have that. They don't have a hinge. All right.
Love it. This was fun.
I gave you all this free consumption.
That's right. That's why we do this. Free tips.